So I went quite a bit off piste in the last recording. I was somewhat disturbed by the failure of the audio in the earlier recording. Um, the issue of Aquinas, does Aquinas have an ethics or does he not have an ethics? What is the Thomas? What is the synthesis, the Aristotelian synthesis amount to in Thomas? Um, in a way, Thomas does not have an ethics in the sense that um, Aristotle shows us the way to live, right? He shows us here's how we should order our life, and it can be brought down from the ethics in the. I mean, remember, in the current university, we tend to make this distinction between ethics as the theoretical practice and morals as the applied, and then there's sort of an in-between ground of the so-called normative, and that distinction wasn't made by Aristotle. But you can see in Aristotle, just in the vague everyday sense, that Aristotle shows us here's how to live, here's the whole picture. On top is we want to prepare life in such a way that the philosophers can do that which human beings are here to do, and then all the ordering of the virtues and so on. So there's a whole picture like that. But in Thomas, what we have is mainly the focus is on God as a mysterious God. And the question is, so there's not, eudaimonia becomes beatitude, but beatitude really means being raised to God. So the good becomes God, but God is enigmatic. Let's say mysterious. Let's use the word mysterious in the context of Thomas. I'll reserve the word enigmatic for the Heideggerian context, because Heidegger speaks also of something in a slightly different register, but I think we can show concretely that there's the change in register. We can denote that just dogmatically by saying Heidegger works with Dasein, whereas of course Thomas doesn't work with Dasein, which then means there's this crack where we see. We could also call it, in a way, from the ancient point of view, the nomos fusus dispute. It harkens back to that. Does the word come on top, or does the given world come on top? And then this is what is seen in Heidegger as playing itself out, unfolding to its most extreme tension up until the time of Nietzsche. And in Nietzsche, we come to the end of metaphysics, which is in its own way, I won't say enigmatic, but it's amorphous, because, for instance, Heidegger opposes the question, are Kierkegaard and Nietzsche doing something which is no longer metaphysics? So maybe the end isn't only pulling up in such a way, maybe some paths along the rock face, to use analogy, some other paths have been seen along this, some footholds and handholds have been seen by Nietzsche or Kierkegaard or by others that go out of this pulling up of this called the end of metaphysics, and of course possibly by Heidegger and Heidegger himself. In Thomas, there's not an ethics in the sense that it's not clear what the whole plan is. There's not a clear applied ethics, because you have to just, even the material itself, the wood of the tabernacle, as it were, has God in it. So at every level, there's the question of something like the beautiful soul, but the beautiful soul is just more like the classical thinking of the difference between feminine thinking and cold intellect, where the beautiful soul does what it does a feeling for others and so on, but not through the keen, sharp understanding of what it's doing, and not through connection to the Godhead, as it were, not or the archetype, if you like. So Thomas's view still reminds of what Heidegger, I believe, criticizes quite a bit, which is Socratic. Socrates, you could say, is in a way, the quintessential exemplar of something called phronesis. He was a phronimos. So, but this is someone of worldly wisdom. But what Socrates says, I think he says it, for instance, in the Apology, is that if I were to come across somebody who were wise, I would be like them. I just don't know what wisdom is. This is the position of the phronimos. So in Aquinas, you can, and remembering that Socrates makes this, I'll call it also enigmatic, or let's say it poses, it confronts us with the question when he says that, when he identifies arte with knowledge, and therefore presents the view that it's not possible that we have this cool intellectual understanding of all things, and then the whole question is whether the will go along with that understanding, which becomes the question largely in the Christian context, sometime around the time of Thomas, although clearly Thomas doesn't hold that. I think what happened is some compartments of Christianity interpreted Thomas in this intellectualist way, whereas others deny that. So there's a vexation over the divided Aquinas, as it were. So we can see in Heidegger this question of which has been tackled by some good scholars on the steadfast resolution, is very much similar to the idea of, as you see in Kant. And of course, Heidegger was praised almost in a unconstrained way, Kant. And I'll point this out as more evidence for my view of the radical defectiveness of the Greeks in Heidegger's eyes, that you might think, you hear very strong praises from Heidegger of the first Greeks. By the way, I spoke about, of course, Parmenides doesn't say that nothing is. I was thinking of the sophist. I'm trying to think of the sophist's view of being, the view in Plato's sophist of being, and the view of Parmenides, the one is, of being in the same thought, in order to contrast that with the way Heidegger thinks about being, remembering that Heidegger, we always have this difficulty in reading Heidegger, and that Heidegger affirms absolutely, utterly, that being is said in many ways. So Heidegger says being in many ways too, and then sometimes you have the being spelled with a Y, and all these different methods of approaching that, but the rubric can never quite get us there otherwise. And let me reiterate more neatly what I was trying to say in an earlier recording, which is that if it were only so that Heidegger's utterance that I have not been understood applied to various more or less gross misunderstandings, such as with Sartre, that would not trouble us very much, but it seems to apply. But I believe that it applies totally to everyone. He says, no one has understood me. And in a way, it even applies to himself, because he may not have understood Heidegger, taken as the rubric for Heidegger. He was constantly starting out new again throughout his whole life. So taking that just as a sort of empty phrase, we have the steadfast resolution, it could be translated in another way, as very similar to the Kantian notion of freedom. But we can see that in Kant, there's still this question of remembering. The spontaneity links to something that was always there, to something eternal. So there's this question of truth or creativity. And then you have all this Strum and Drang and Storm and Stress issues, and the Kant crisis, and all the romanticism and all this stuff, which has a somewhat more respectable form in Goethe or Schelling, and the idea that education should be for quickening our activity or for creativity and so on. And then you see that, but in Nietzsche it comes to a greater metaphysical height, because Nietzsche brings out the idea of the life-giving lie in the context of we don't know what the truth is. We don't know what truth means, and therefore you have this notion of the life-giving lie is in a way a truth. Because if you say, just for the one simple point around that is just, if you say there is no truth, then you posit a truth, right? That's very simple, and it operates on the level of the law of contradiction in a way. But it's this question of what the truth is. But it's important here because Heidegger is on the side of the people that are still trying to talk about the truth. He talks about the truth of being. He's not on the side of the people like Nietzsche that are speaking of the open creativity, which is just a flip side of nihilism, understood as there's no essences, right? We can't say what the purpose of something is in the way the Catholics would have us do. But the Heideggerian position is it's slightly more complicated just when we're taking it as a dogmatic position where we can just state it. And then there's the second problem of whether what I'm calling the cogency, like whether we can actually, just hearing something isn't enough to really, doesn't mean we really, we're living by it, if you like, or that we really have the cogency within us. Just because we've heard of something doesn't mean that much. The question would be whether we were really impressed in such a way that we turned and we took everything up from that viewpoint. Even the question here of turning rather than making a leap, which Heidegger speaks of both, I think can be sorted out to some extent. But just dogmatically, I would say in Heidegger it's like this. It's the being is creative. It's not us that are creative. So there is a truth of being, because if we sense the play of being, rather than being locked in the intellectual discussion on the one side, or the heavy seriousness of politics on the other side, but sense the play of being, then there is a truth of being, and being itself is creative, but it's not us that are creative. I will start with that hypothesis, if you like, and going forward.